The hall was buzzing with excitement, filled with families, music students, and townspeople who had come to enjoy a small community music event. The wooden floor creaked slightly under the weight of the gathered crowd, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the stage, where a grand piano sat under the warm glow of a spotlight. Even from the back, one could feel the quiet anticipation that hung in the air like a tangible presence. Among the attendees was a young woman, who preferred to stay in the shadows. She wasn't there to perform, not really. She had always been quiet, someone who blended into the background, someone who observed more than she spoke. Her friends often teased her for it, saying that she carried entire conversations in her eyes while keeping her lips sealed. Today she had come only to support a friend, to watch the performances and perhaps, if she was brave, to quietly tap on the piano just for herself during a break. But as she made her way past the rows of chairs toward the back of the stage, she noticed him. He was impossible to miss. Confident, loud, and sharp-tongued, he had a presence that seemed to fill the room. He had already made a few comments that drew small laughs from the audience, talking about who he thought could play well and who could not. He wasn't mean in the subtle way people often are. His remarks had a biting quality, designed to humiliate, to draw attention to his own knowledge and skill, and when his gaze landed on her, something in the room shifted. The young woman froze for a moment, clutching the strap of her small bag against her chest. He looked her up and down and, with a smirk, announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Well, if anyone here actually thinks she could play a real piece, I'd like to see it. But I doubt she even knows a single note beyond a children's tune." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the crowd. A few people smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond, while others glanced down at the floor. The young woman felt heat rising to her cheeks. Her stomach twisted, and for a moment she thought of turning around and leaving, letting the comment slide past her like it always had in the past. But something inside her stirred a quiet, unspoken determination that had been building up over years of being underestimated. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about the fear or the embarrassment. She noticed the tiny cluster of people at the back who had seen what happened, including an elderly music teacher who had been observing the room quietly. The teacher gave her a small nod, a gentle encouragement that seemed to whisper, "If you want, you can show them who you really are." The young woman took a slow, steadying breath. Her hands hovered near the piano keys, not yet touching them, but the decision had already formed in her mind. She would play. Not for the man, not to prove him wrong, but because she could, because her music deserved to exist in that moment. The hall seemed to hold its breath along with her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The light seemed to shine just a little brighter on the polished surface of the piano. The murmur of the audience faded, leaving only the faintest hum of anticipation. The man, noticing her movement, raised an eyebrow and let out a sharp laugh, a sound meant to intimidate. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said. "I can't wait to hear what you'll embarrass yourself with." His words echoed through the hall, but they did not have the power to sway her. She felt a strange calmness settle over her, a kind of inner silence that made everything else fade into the background. Slowly, she stepped closer to the piano. The wooden floor beneath her felt solid and grounding, each step helping her steady the storm of nervous thoughts in her mind. She glanced at the keys. The familiar pattern of black and white that had been her companion through countless lonely hours of practice. Each key seemed to hum softly, as if inviting her to tell her story through sound. She took her seat on the bench, her fingers hovering above the first note she had decided to play. The audience, sensing that something unusual was about to happen, quieted even more. A few people shifted forward in their seats, curiosity sparking in their eyes. There was a faint rustle as someone adjusted a camera, capturing the moment that felt charged with tension. The young woman's heartbeat was steady now, not fast with fear, but alive with focus. Her mind cleared, and, for the first time, the voices of doubt around her seemed distant, almost irrelevant. She pressed the first key. A clear, resonant note rang out across the hall, cutting through the lingering tension like sunlight through clouds. It was not flashy, not loud, but it held a depth that made the audience lean in unconsciously. Another note followed, then another, each one deliberate, each one carrying a story only she could tell. The man, who had been smirking moments ago, furrowed his brow. He leaned forward slightly, confused by the strength and precision of her playing. His eyes darted around the room, seeking validation from the audience, but all he found were silent faces, attentive and captivated. The young woman's music began to fill every corner of the hall, weaving a tapestry of sound that felt alive. The warmth of the melody seemed to wrap around the listeners, drawing them in without effort. It was not a complex piece, not one designed to impress with speed or technical difficulty. It was a piece that came from the heart, born out of quiet resilience and long hours of private practice. Every note resonated with emotion, telling stories of patience, courage, and unspoken strength. The elderly music teacher at the back nodded slowly, recognizing the careful control, the natural musicality that often takes years to develop. Even the smallest movements of her fingers seemed intentional, speaking volumes without the need for words. As the piece continued, the audience shifted in their seats, mesmerized. Conversations had completely ceased. The air itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, and every note she played brought with it a sense of honesty and authenticity that was impossible to ignore. Children stopped fidgeting, couples leaned toward each other in quiet awe, and the few who had previously laughed nervously found themselves unable to tear their eyes away. Meanwhile, the man who had mocked her could no longer hide his growing unease. His confident posture faltered. He crossed his arms, but the smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to disbelief. The sound of her music challenged his assumptions, stripping away the smugness he had carried into the hall. He shifted from foot to foot, realizing that he could not control this moment with his words as he had done before. The young woman was unaware of his reaction, entirely immersed in the music. Each note, each pause, each delicate touch on the keys was her conversation with the world, a silent yet powerful statement of who she was. She played not to win, not to humiliate, not to claim recognition, but simply to let the music speak the truths that she had often kept hidden. Her face was serene, her eyes focused yet gentle, reflecting the emotion that flowed through her fingertips. As the final chord lingered in the room, a hush fell over the audience. For a moment, no one moved. The energy in the hall shifted from tension to reverence. What had started as an awkward, potentially humiliating moment had transformed into something extraordinary, a demonstration of courage, talent, and inner strength. The young woman slowly lifted her hands from the keys, breathing lightly, as if she had only just realized the power of the silence around her. Somewhere in the back, the elderly music teacher smiled softly, proud of the young woman's courage and skill. The man who had tried to belittle her stood frozen, unable to find words. The audience, caught between admiration and astonishment, began to stir, whispers spreading like wildfire as people tried to express the awe they felt. The young woman, still seated at the piano, allowed herself a small, quiet smile, not of victory, but of relief, of satisfaction, and of quiet pride. She had entered the hall expecting to stay invisible, to fade into the background. Instead, she had created a moment that no one, not even the man who mocked her, could ignore. And as she sat there, feeling the echoes of her own music fade gently into the room, she realized that sometimes true strength isn't in proving someone wrong, it's in simply standing quietly and letting your talent speak for itself. After the first few notes, the hall was filled with a curious, almost sacred silence. The young woman had already surprised the audience, but she wasn't finished yet. She took a deep breath and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Her heart beat steadily, no longer with nervousness, but with quiet determination. She had decided that this moment was hers, and she would let the music flow as it had always flowed when no one was watching. She began to play again. This time a piece she had been working on for months in her small, quiet room at home. It was a piece that had started as a simple melody but had grown into something deeper, something that carried all the emotions she had kept to herself for so long. Every note she pressed spoke of her hopes, her struggles, and her courage. The music was not loud or flashy. It was gentle, yet it demanded attention, pulling the audience into its world. As she played, the man who had mocked her earlier could no longer maintain his arrogance. His confident posture wavered, and he leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as if he were trying to analyze the sound and find a flaw. But there was none. Every chord, every pause, every soft whisper of melody was perfect, filled with precision and emotion. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly unsure of how to react. The smug smile that had been plastered on his face at the beginning was gone. Replaced by confusion and something closer to awe, the audience meanwhile was completely captivated. People who had been chatting quietly, distracted by their phones, or glancing around now focused entirely on her. The elderly music teacher in the back of the hall had tears welling in their eyes. They recognized the skill, the emotional depth, and the hours of practice that went into producing such a performance. A mother in the front row held her child a little closer, feeling the music seep into her soul, and a teenager who had been doodling in a notebook stopped, pencil frozen mid-stroke. The young woman's music had drawn every single listener into its embrace. The young woman herself had lost track of the audience. She was no longer thinking about anyone else in the room. She wasn't playing to impress, or to prove a point, or even to respond to the man who had mocked her. She was playing for the music itself. Every note was an expression of her inner world, a story told without words, a conversation between her heart and the piano. She could feel the vibrations of the keys under her fingers, the way each sound lingered in the air and intertwined with the next. It was a moment of pure connection, both with herself and with everyone listening. The man, who had tried to make her feel small, now looked helpless. He had expected her to falter, to make mistakes, to embarrass herself. Instead, he was witnessing something he could not deny. His arms, once crossed confidently, now hung loosely at his sides. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, How is she doing that? His voice carried a note of disbelief, a sound he had never made when standing in front of a crowd. The confidence he had relied on to dominate the room was gone, replaced by a growing awareness that he had misjudged her entirely. As the melody grew, the young woman's fingers moved with increasing confidence. The music built gradually, rising and falling like gentle waves, sometimes soft and delicate, sometimes bold and strong. Each transition felt natural, as if the piano itself was guiding her hands, whispering the next note she should play. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel every vibration, every resonance. In that moment, she was not just playing notes. She was breathing life into the story she had kept hidden inside her for so long. Around the hall, people began to shift in their seats, leaning forward, caught up in the rising tide of emotion. Whispers spread like ripples in a pond. "She's incredible," one person murmured. "I didn't expect—" "Wow," said another. But most were too stunned to speak. They could only watch, listen, and absorb the beauty of what was unfolding in front of them. The young woman had transformed what could have been an awkward, embarrassing situation into a moment of pure inspiration. The elderly music teacher, unable to contain their admiration, whispered to the person next to them, "She has something special. This isn't just practice, it's a gift." Their words were met with nods from several others who had realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the small children, who often fidgeted during long events, sat still, captivated by the sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the piano itself. Back at the piano, the young woman's expression was serene but focused. She felt a mixture of pride and humility. Pride because she had the courage to step forward despite the earlier humiliation. Humility because she knew the music was bigger than herself. She was a vessel for the sound, not its master. Each note carried the weight of her experiences, the moments of doubt, the hours of lonely practice, the small victories she had celebrated when no one was around. And now, in the spotlight, she shared all of it without saying a single word. The man could no longer maintain his composure. His eyes darted to the floor, then to the piano, then around the hall, as if seeking some escape from the truth he could not deny. He had come to humiliate her, to show everyone his superiority, to make her feel small. Instead, she had taken the very stage he thought he controlled and transformed it into a space where her talent and emotion ruled completely. His head lowered slightly, the arrogance gone, replaced by something he had rarely felt: respect mixed with embarrassment. The music continued to unfold, each note carrying a new layer of emotion. The young woman's hands moved effortlessly, almost as if they had a life of their own. She didn't rush. She didn't pause unnecessarily. She simply let the story of her music flow. Some notes were soft, almost a whisper, evoking the quiet moments of life when we feel unseen. Others were strong, commanding attention, reflecting the moments when courage demands we rise, despite fear. The audience was transfixed, caught between awe and emotional resonance. A few people instinctively reached for their phones, hoping to capture a fragment of the moment, but most quickly realized that no recording could ever capture the depth of what they were experiencing. The subtle shifts in timing, the delicate control of dynamics, the emotion in each note, it was impossible to bottle or replay fully. It was alive, fleeting, and utterly human. The young woman had created a connection that went beyond performance. She had created an experience that touched hearts directly. The man, who had started the evening full of confidence and arrogance, now found himself shrinking in his own mind. He whispered again, barely audible, She's better than I thought." But the words felt insufficient, almost ridiculous in their simplicity, because he knew it was not just talent he was witnessing, it was authenticity. The young woman's performance had stripped away the superficial judgments he relied on, revealing a truth he could no longer ignore as the piece reached its climax. The young woman's playing became more expressive, more intentional. The melody twisted and turned, rising to heights of exhilaration and then falling to soft, introspective lows. Each note carried emotional weight, guiding the audience on a journey without words. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others sat rigid, almost afraid to move, as if disturbing the fragile, perfect beauty of the moment. The hall itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the young woman's fingers lingered on the last few notes, letting them resonate fully before lifting her hands from the keys. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, a collective pause where the weight of what had just occurred sank in. And then, slowly, the audience began to stir. Small claps began at first, tentative and uncertain. But one by one, the claps grew, spreading throughout the hall, building into a wave of admiration and appreciation. People were cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling in quiet wonder. The young woman exhaled softly, feeling a sense of relief and quiet pride. She had taken a moment that could have been filled with shame and embarrassment and transformed it into something beautiful. She had not played to humiliate, and she had not played to win. She had played because she could, because her music deserved to be heard, and because she had finally embraced the courage to step forward. The man stood frozen. Caught in the middle of the applause he could neither ignore nor join. His head remained lowered slightly, shoulders slumped. He had come to belittle, to dominate, to assert his superiority, and instead, he had witnessed something he could not control or belittle. For the first time that evening, he realized the weight of underestimating someone based on appearances. The young woman, quiet and unassuming, had not only survived his mockery, she had transformed it into a triumph of authenticity, talent, and courage. And so, as the audience continued to applaud, the young woman allowed herself a small, calm smile. She had not sought recognition, but she had earned it anyway. She had not intended to prove the man wrong, but in doing so, she had done so effortlessly, with grace and humility. In that moment, the hall was no longer a place of judgment or mockery. It was a place of respect, awe, and human connection. The music had begun to settle in the hall, but it was far from finished. The young woman's fingers moved over the piano keys with a grace and confidence that seemed almost otherworldly. Each note told a story, carrying layers of emotion that words could never capture. The audience, who had been watching in awe during the first part of her performance, now leaned forward even more, drawn deeper into the music as if it had become a living, breathing presence in the room. Her hands glided effortlessly, shifting between soft, gentle passages and bold, commanding chords that filled the hall with a resonance so full it seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone present. She was no longer playing merely to perform. She was speaking directly to the hearts of the listeners. The melody reflected her journey, her struggles, her quiet victories, and the strength she had found in moments when no one was watching. Each note was a reflection of her soul, raw and unfiltered, yet beautiful and controlled. The man who had mocked her earlier could barely stand still. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, a nervous falter, but what he saw was something entirely different. His arms, once confidently crossed, now hung loosely at his sides. His eyes widened slightly with each passing chord, disbelief growing in his expression. He had come to belittle, to dominate, to feel superior, and now he found himself powerless in the face of her talent. The realization settled over him like a cold weight. He had misjudged her completely. Around the hall, people were becoming increasingly emotional. Some covered their mouths in shock, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, transporting them to memories and feelings they hadn't accessed in years. The elderly music teacher at the back of the room had tears rolling down their cheeks. They had seen many talented musicians over the years, but there was something different about this performance, a depth and authenticity that could not be taught. Something that radiated from the performer herself. Children, who often squirmed and whispered during long performances, sat completely still. Even the restless ones seemed entranced, mesmerized by the flowing melody that carried both quiet introspection and soaring intensity. The mother in the front row held her child close, feeling the music fill not just the room but the spaces in her heart where words often failed. Everyone in that hall, regardless of age or experience, was captivated. The young woman's face remained calm, serene even, though her mind was fully present in the music. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide her fingers, letting the emotions she had stored for so long flow freely through the piano. Her movements were precise yet fluid, each chord and note landing perfectly, conveying emotion without a single word. She was not performing for praise, and she was not performing out of defiance. She was performing because this was her voice. The way she spoke her truth to the world. As the piece continued, it shifted in tone. What had begun as a gentle, flowing melody grew in intensity. The music rose and fell like the tide, sometimes delicate and intimate, sometimes bold and commanding. Each transition was seamless, drawing the listeners along on a journey that seemed both personal and universal. Some people instinctively reached for their phones, wanting to capture a fragment of the moment, but quickly realized that the true experience could never be replicated on a screen. This was a living moment, and it demanded to be felt, not merely recorded. The man could no longer hide his reaction. He shifted from foot to foot, uncertain, his eyes darting around the hall as he searched for support from others, but there was none. All eyes were on her, all attention captured by the music that had turned the atmosphere into something almost sacred. He had expected laughter or ridicule, but instead he faced something far more powerful, genuine awe and admiration. The arrogance he had carried into the room seemed to crumble with each note, leaving only a quiet, humbling realization that he had been completely wrong about her. Her hands moved faster now, yet with perfect control. Complex patterns and harmonies intertwined effortlessly, each one carrying a distinct emotion. The audience could feel it, even if they couldn't identify the technical details. The energy in the room had changed entirely. What had started as a casual performance in a community hall had become an experience that gripped everyone present. People whispered to each other, amazed at what they were witnessing. "I can't believe it," one said softly. "She's extraordinary," another added, voice trembling slightly. Some of the attendees had been musicians themselves, and even they looked on in stunned admiration. The subtle shifts in timing, the delicate balance between dynamics, the expression she poured into every note, these were qualities that only came from years of dedicated practice. Yet there was also something deeper, something innate that couldn't be taught. It was her soul speaking through the piano, and that made the performance unforgettable. The young woman herself remained unaware of the growing whispers, the awe in the audience, and the confusion on the man's face. She was fully immersed in the music. Each note, each chord, each delicate pause was intentional, part of the story she was telling. She felt no fear, no pressure, only a connection to the instrument and the emotions she wished to convey. She had turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into something beautiful, something that touched hearts and inspired minds. As the piece neared its climax, the intensity increased. Her fingers moved with incredible precision, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and emotive. The audience was silent, collectively holding their breath as they experienced the music at its most powerful. Even the man who had mocked her could not look away. He leaned forward slightly, unable to escape the reality of what was happening. Every note she played dismantled the assumptions he had made. Every chord stripped away his arrogance, leaving only the raw truth of her talent. The final moments of the piece were breathtaking. The music rose to a peak, filling the hall with a sense of triumph and beauty. The young woman's hands moved swiftly but gracefully, each note striking with clarity and emotion. Then, as the last chord lingered in the air, she allowed it to resonate fully before gently lifting her hands from the keys. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. That silence was heavy with emotion. People absorbed what had just happened, some with tears in their eyes, others with wide, astonished smiles. The music had transformed the room, leaving everyone changed in some small way. It had carried them through a journey of feeling and imagination, a journey guided by the young woman's courage and skill. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the hall. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, but soon grew into a thunderous wave of appreciation. People clapped, cheered, and even stood in admiration. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others exchanged glances filled with wonder. The applause was not just for her technical skill, it was for the honesty, the emotion, and the courage she had shown. She had faced ridicule and fear, and she had turned it into something beautiful that touched every heart in the room. The man who had mocked her remained frozen in place. His head was bowed slightly, shoulders slumped. He could not meet her eyes. The confidence he had carried so easily was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar feeling, respect mixed with humility. He had underestimated her, and in that underestimation he had witnessed something extraordinary. He had learned a lesson without a word being spoken, a lesson about the danger of judging others by appearances or first impressions. The young woman allowed herself a quiet, satisfied breath. She had not sought victory or recognition, but she had received both anyway. She had not played to prove anyone wrong, but she had done so, effortlessly and with grace. The hall, once a place of judgment and potential humiliation, had become a place of inspiration, admiration, and connection. She rose slowly from the piano bench, a calm smile on her face, acknowledging the audience with quiet humility. Some people tried to approach her, their words filled with wonder and gratitude, but she simply nodded, letting her music speak louder than any conversation could. She had transformed a moment that could have been painful into a moment that would be remembered by everyone, present for years to come. And as she stepped away from the piano, leaving the final echoes of her music behind, the man who had belittled her remained standing in place, his head still bowed. He understood now that true talent, courage, and authenticity could never be judged superficially. He had been humbled, not by words or argument, but by the undeniable power of her music and the quiet strength behind it. The echoes of her last note lingered in the hall, soft and almost reverent. For a few seconds, the audience remained silent, as if afraid to break the fragile, beautiful spell she had created. Even the smallest cough seemed intrusive. All around her, people were taking in what they had just experienced, their hearts racing with admiration, awe, and a touch of disbelief. The young woman sat quietly at the piano bench, her hands resting gently on her lap, a calm smile on her face. Unaware of how profoundly she had affected everyone in the room, the applause came slowly at first, like hesitant raindrops on a quiet morning. Then it grew, swelling into a wave of sound that filled the hall completely. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles that spoke of pure amazement. The music had spoken louder than words ever could, reaching into hearts and stirring emotions that had long been forgotten. Every person in that hall felt changed, even if only slightly, by what they had just witnessed. Among the audience, the man who had mocked her earlier stood frozen. His head remained bowed, not in arrogance this time, but in recognition of something he could not deny. He had come to the hall with the intention of belittling her, expecting to assert his superiority, to draw attention to his own knowledge and skill. And yet, here he was, utterly humbled by the young woman's talent, courage, and authenticity. The confidence he had relied on for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, uncomfortable awareness that he had underestimated. Someone who had far more strength and ability than he had ever imagined. For a moment, he remained where he was, uncertain of what to do. The audience's eyes were on her, not him, and he realized that this was not the time for words or explanations. The young woman had not performed to compete with him. She had performed to express herself, to share her music, and to step into her own light. And in doing so, she had shown everyone in the room, him included, that courage and talent could not be diminished by mockery or judgment. Slowly, he stepped forward, almost as if in a trance. His movements were hesitant, measured, careful. He approached the piano, his gaze fixed on the young woman. When he reached her, he paused, unsure of what to say. The applause continued around them, but in that moment all of it seemed distant, secondary to the silent, powerful message that her performance had delivered. He finally looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since she had started playing. There was no smugness in his expression, no hint of the arrogance he had shown earlier. Instead, there was a quiet respect, tinged with a sense of regret for the words he had spoken so carelessly. I was wrong," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the fading applause. "I should never have doubted you. I should never have spoken the way I did." His words were simple, but they carried weight. They were an acknowledgment not only of her talent, but also of the courage it had taken to step forward and play, despite his ridicule. The young woman nodded gently, her expression calm and gracious. She did not respond with triumph or anger. There was no need. Her music had already spoken for her, conveying everything she wanted to express. She had transformed a moment of humiliation into a display of strength and beauty, and now the acknowledgment of her talent was coming not from the audience alone, but from the very person who had sought to diminish her. Around them, people were still applauding, some cheering, others whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Many were wiping away tears, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and inspiration. The performance had been more than just a display of technical skill. It had been a demonstration of resilience, courage, and authenticity. The young woman's music had touched everyone, creating a shared experience that transcended words and connected hearts. The man remained silent for a moment longer, taking in the weight of the situation. He had underestimated her, judged her based on appearances and assumptions, and had been humbled in the most profound way. For the first time, he understood that talent and strength were not always visible on the surface. They could be quiet, unassuming, and yet incredibly powerful. The young woman had proven that without a single word, through nothing more than her courage and her music. Gradually, he lowered his head slightly, a gesture that spoke volumes. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of her ability, her courage, and the impact of her performance. In that small, simple action, he conveyed a deep respect, a recognition of something far greater than himself. The young woman watched him with quiet understanding. She did not gloat, she did not mock. She simply accepted his acknowledgement with grace, showing that true strength lies not in defeating others, but in expressing oneself fully and authentically. The audience continued to respond, their admiration filling the room. People were speaking quietly to each other, sharing their amazement and excitement. Many described the performance as unforgettable, breathtaking, and inspiring. Some attendees had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotional depth and honesty of the music. The young woman's performance had done more than impress. It had touched hearts, inspired courage, and reminded everyone present of the power of authenticity and resilience. Even the children in the audience, who had been captivated from the start, seemed changed. They had witnessed someone who had faced ridicule and fear, and yet had risen above it, creating something beautiful in the process. It was a lesson in courage, a demonstration of the power of persistence, and a reminder that true talent cannot be hidden forever. As the applause began to subside, the young woman rose from the piano bench. She stood quietly, acknowledging the audience with a gentle nod. Her posture was calm, dignified, and full of quiet confidence. She had not sought recognition, but she had earned it anyway. She had not performed to prove a point, but she had done so effortlessly through the power of her music. In that moment, she was a symbol of courage, grace, and the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself. The man took a final step forward, reaching a respectful distance from her. His head remained slightly bowed, a gesture of humility and acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said softly. "I will never forget this, and I will never doubt anyone the way I doubted you." There was no bitterness, no lingering arrogance, only sincerity and respect. The young woman nodded again, allowing herself a small, calm smile. She had faced the challenge, embraced her courage, and expressed her true self. In return, she had received recognition, respect, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had remained true to herself in the face of doubt and ridicule. The audience gradually began to disperse, though many lingered, still speaking in hushed tones about the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. Some approached the young woman to offer their thanks and congratulations, while others simply watched from a distance, marveling at the courage and talent they had seen. Each person left the hall carrying a piece of the experience with them, a memory of the power of authenticity and the impact of courage expressed through art. As she stepped away from the piano, the young woman felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. She had entered the hall quietly, prepared to blend into the background, but she had emerged as someone who had touched hearts and inspired courage. She had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a triumph of authenticity, resilience, and artistic expression. The man remained for a while longer, reflecting on what he had witnessed. The lesson he had learned would stay with him. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. Never judge without understanding, and always respect the courage it takes to express oneself fully. Her music had spoken louder than any words, and he had been forced to bow his head in recognition of that truth. Outside the hall, the evening air was cool and calm. The audience departed, carrying with them the memory of a performance that would not be forgotten. Conversations were filled with admiration, inspiration, and reflection on the impact of courage and authenticity. The young woman walked quietly through the crowd, feeling the weight and beauty of the experience settle in her heart. She had shared something deeply personal, and the world had responded with respect and appreciation. As the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, a quiet sense of completion settled over the space. The music had ended, but its echoes remained, lingering in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. The young woman had faced ridicule and doubt, yet she had risen above it with grace, courage, and authenticity. Her performance was a testament to the power of believing in oneself, the beauty of self-expression, and the impact of quiet, steadfast courage. In that moment, the young woman knew that she had not only shared her music, but she had also shared a piece of herself. And in doing so, she had left a lasting impression on everyone present, a reminder that talent, courage, and authenticity could never be diminished by mockery or doubt, and that sometimes the quietest, most unassuming individuals could create the most unforgettable moments.